So you're going to start? So this is us. We've been full-time. We were full-time mostly in Congo from 1973 to 2012. And we go out every year now, January, February, March, particularly to encourage the team there. Not very many people visit out there now. It's pretty unsettled, lots of rebel activity. We teach in what we call a nurses training school, but teaching anesthetic assistants and pharmacists and public health workers, 14 different options in this nursing college. And Nancy runs a scholarship program, which she'll be telling a little bit about a bit later on.
Nyankundi, Congo, that's where we met Ken. That's where he came to be our accountant, and where we had settled in. It's a lovely green place, a beautiful view. But Ken did say to me, well, tell us how you got there. Well, the first factor was that my grandparents were missionaries in South Africa. My grandfather was a carpenter, and he went out to build a mission hospital. So I knew from my earliest days that really anybody could be a missionary. Just use the skills that God has given you and contribute somewhere. And the second thing was that I decided in first year medical school to volunteer because they said there was a big need for medical and paramedical personnel. And someone found me a job in a Christian hospital in Kampala, Uganda, to work in their lab for the summer. And so I was off. But just before I left, I met a couple who had been 20 years in Congo. And this couple said to me, oh, but if you're going to Uganda, you must visit Congo as well. They have a shared border because Uganda's the pearl of Africa and Congo is just digging itself out of the 1964 rebellion. So I said, okay, they helped me get a visa and I did a 10-day, more or less, hitchhiking trip into Congo and went back 2 years later as a short-termer in my final year of medical school, and I really knew that God had something there for me. The program was run in French, which I had loved in high school, and it was intermission, which seemed very balanced, and it was training young men to be nurse practitioners in communities where there was no medical care at all. So I felt that's what God was saying, and according to his plans, either I was willing to be single the rest of my life there, or if he had other plans, I'd accept that too. And on the way home in London, a certain Dr. Philip Wood invited me out to dinner, and we could see the way the Lord was bringing our paths together.
So we were married 50 years ago, just last month. We've just had a big celebration. And we decided we would have our rings engraved, our wedding rings. And on Nancy's ring, we put Ebenezer. And that means hitherto the Lord has helped us. And the Lord certainly helped us in 6 years that we'd known each other prior to getting married. And the Lord has helped us ever since in the 50 years there in the middle of Africa. On my ring, I had Mizpah engraved. And that's a quotation which means the Lord look between you and I when we are apart. And it's always been our desire that we stay as close together as we possibly can, enjoy doing a presentation like this together. And the Lord has been good. We have enjoyed our 50 years together.
After our wedding, we went to Belgium for tropical medicine in French. And it was very challenging. And at first, we applied for a grant. I applied to the Canada Council, and Philip, having a British heritage, applied to the British Council. They told me yes, I'd have a scholarship. Philip, no. But when we went to Brussels, they checked on mine and said, yes, you'll be getting it in the mail. And they looked up Philip's name and said, oh, yes, you will have one too. So we had the princely sum of £160 a month to live on in Belgium for our studies in tropical medicine. The Lord was faithful.
We were moving to Congo, French-speaking country. We were expecting to do a lot of teaching in French. We needed to understand, and particularly to understand medical French. So there was this course, 5-month course in Belgium, in French, and boy, for me it was really difficult. Nancy's French is much better than mine. But every evening we'd come home. Fortunately, they gave us a lot of polycopied notes there in the course, and we would sit down on a couch and have an English-French dictionary between us, and one would take one course and the other would take another course, and every time we came across a French word we didn't understand, we would pencil in the English translation of that word, so that we only had to do half the number of courses in order to be able to pass the exams at the end.
And from there we we were told to buy a French medical book called Médecine Tropicale. It was £80. That was half of our monthly support, but we were going to Congo, which was French-speaking, and so one Saturday we went and we purchased it, and the Lord helped us through that month, even though we'd spent £80 on that book. And it is still today the classic reference book. It's been updated about 10 times, and it's still the classic book for medicine, tropical medicine. In our early working days, well, after some missionary training in UK, we went off to Congo, and in our early working days, Helen Roseveare said that she would teach us Swahili 1 hour a day for 5 weeks. And she was pretty intensive and intentional about the course, and we listened and learned as best we could, and then they set us free in the hospital with a translator to get started on seeing patients. It is absolutely crucial in cross-cultural missions to know the language. So we'd done our best on French in Belgium, and now we did our best on Swahili in Congo. And it was a challenge, but it was good.
Here's a picture of Helen. Some of you may have read some of her books. She's been quite a prolific author about her time there in Congo. Had a pretty difficult time, but we arrived just as she was leaving, and we took over the nurses training school that she had started. But for me, I hadn't operated. I mean, you do all the preparation you possibly can for missionary service, and nothing is ever wasted. I'd done surgical training, but then I'd done tropical medicine and then missionary orientation. So it was quite a long time since I had operated on human beings. And there at Nebobongo Hospital in the middle of nowhere, with very little in the way of backup help, we had some very difficult cases, and just I praise the Lord for the way that He enabled us to do some fairly difficult surgery after not having worked in a hospital for quite some time.
There's a verse that meant a lot to me in those early years, particularly Psalm 16, verse 7. I will bless the Lord who guides me. Even at night, my heart instructs me. And there were 2 toddlers under my care who had unknown diagnoses at different times. And in the night, God woke me up, and I had an idea of what the problem actually was. I referred them to Philip. He operated on each one of them, and they had a great result. So we can trust the Lord to teach us even in the middle of the night. Whoops.
This is, would you recognize this? This is the Sahara Desert. I drove out twice from England to Congo across the Sahara Desert, carrying medical supplies, carrying new vehicles that we've been given for the medical work there. I could tell you many, many stories of those 2 trips, but just one incident that occurred in northern Niger. And we're driving along a track which is really basically one oil drum after another, and you don't move from one oil drum till you can see the next one. You don't want to get lost in the desert. And the track came to a dead halt with a huge sand dune that had blown right across the road. We climbed up this sand dune, looked from the top, and you could see the track going in at one end and coming out at the other end, but it was enormous. We couldn't possibly drive round it. We had to drive over it. And that was a terrible, terrible time. We were very heavily laden, fuel and water and medical supplies and lots of other equipment for going across the desert. So we drove up onto this sand dune, and immediately we got bogged down in the sand. So now we have to dig out the back wheels with a shovel, put in a sand ladder, and we can move forward 10 feet, something like that, and we're bogged down again. We have to do it all over again. Middle of the day, temperature 120 degrees Fahrenheit. We were absolutely exhausted. And we sat down in the shade on beside the Land Rover. And I said to Dave, I said, we haven't prayed. We should pray. So we prayed, God help us in this very difficult situation. And almost immediately, there was a little short wheelbase Land Cruiser that came up, absolutely empty. Who is driving through the middle of the Sahara empty? No water, no fuel, nothing visible in the back of this Land Cruiser. And he was so light, he could drive up and over this sand dune without any problem at all. And he had a winch on the front, so he stationed himself on the other side, and he connected his winch to our winch, and we winched ourselves over this sand dune and down the other side. And I believe these were angels. I believe God sent us some angels to help us out of that very difficult time. They sped away. We never even said thank you to them, but it was a wonderful deliverance.
Another verse that has been particularly important to me is John 13:34 and 35. And Jesus said, "A new commandment I give unto you. Love one another as I have loved you. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." And that has really been a focus of our work all the way along, that the Lord, by his Holy Spirit, would fill us more and more with love, that we could love others and have them come to faith in Jesus.
This was 2002. Our medical center was invaded by rebel groups. We were not really expecting this. The hospital was there to serve everybody, anybody that was sick from any side, but Congo has been involved in conflict for many, many years now. And there were bullets flying around the house there. I wasn't quite sure whether I was ever going to see my wife again. She was here in Canada for 90th birthday of her mother. And probably in Untitled at that time, more than 2,000 people lost their lives. They lost their lives in a genocide. They happened to belong to the wrong tribe. Untitled was quite a mixture of different tribes, but if you were in the wrong tribe that day, you lost your life. This was the picture of the nursing college that we had been very involved in there, and it was completely destroyed. The roof was taken off, and this picture taken some 1 year later when we were able to go back to Untitled. But the Lord undertook for us. Hitherto, the Lord has helped us. We've been evacuated from Africa 3 times because of different problems, and we've lost a lot of things. We've lost a lot of goods, a lot of this world's goods. We've tried to live a very simple lifestyle with the very minimum, and God has been faithful, and we are here to tell the story.
We were displaced by war for 4 years in the next province south, but the time came for us to move back to Bunia, which is just close to Untitled, feeling that the size of college that we anticipated would not be well served in Untitled, which had become an even smaller village. And 5 friends enabled us to purchase a piece of land with an old house on it. And then the general director of the nursing college had the vision to have some fantastic building done. And this was the first series of 12 classrooms, and went on to several others with funds from Bread for the World in Germany. And it's first-class construction. And one fellow in the city who's not really what you'd call a close friend, he did say to me, "You know, the college has the best buildings in the city." And so at the moment, we have 18 classrooms and a whole office block for the staff. And the project has been placed before Bread for the World in Germany that we would finish off, make it 24 classrooms and a library and administration offices. So we're going ahead and trusting the Lord. The college is now up to 1,000 students.
One major problem in Congo is unemployment. There just is not salaries available for everybody that would like a salary. A lot of people make some money by threatening people with guns, and this is part of the unruly nature of society out there at the moment. But we are able to provide an education. We've got 1,000 students in this college at the moment, and as I say, in lots of different branches, medical branches, anesthesia and pharmacy and this, that and the other. And so we are very much trying to provide skills and employment for as many people as we possibly can. This whole work these days is completely in African hands. When we go at their invitation. Here's the executive committee of the whole Centre Médical Évangélique, Evangelical Medical Center in English. We work under them. They tell us what they would like us to do. We give them advice. They don't have to take our advice. But they are a lovely, lovely group, mainly men. We're trying to encourage more and more women to get involved in administration and direction of the center. But this is the group at the moment who are running this center, which now includes 3 hospitals and 2 different training schools.
Now, when we moved to Bunia in 2007, the challenge was that a very small clinic was being run, and they had rented an old hotel for their inpatients, and it was as close to a disaster as you can imagine. For one thing, there were 2 steps between every patient room. It went down into a valley. Well, if you have someone who's very ill and you have them on a stretcher, how are you going to get them back up 2 steps until you get them, say, to the operating room? It was a disaster. So the challenge was to build a new hospital. In the summer of 2007, Philip solicited from the island of Jersey their rehabilitation funds, and we were helped by Tier Fund in Holland, and here we are in the new hospital in 2007. And there's ongoing building, including a surgical ward, which is nearing completion, and the next one will be a neonatal ward, which is very much needed. So it's been really exciting to see a new hospital grow, and it also has a private ward, which has only 8 rooms, but each room has a private shower and toilet. And several people have told us, oh, we should build another private ward because it's always full. And they would like to, some people make reservations to say, well, if I have to have my hernia repaired, I'll come when I know that there's a spare room in the private ward. It's been really encouraging, and all the staff there are Congolese.
We are trying to make it as auto-financing as possible. That's to say, receipts from patients are used to buy medicines and used to pay the salaries of the African staff that are there on the hospital, and all the staff are African these days. It's hard work, but they are making a go of it. In part, we try and steal from the rich in order to pay for the poor. We have a number of chaplains in the hospital. This is a former chaplain, Malona, and you know that not everybody needs to go to church, but most people at one time or another need to go to hospital, and there they hear the gospel from chaplains who can go from bed to bed and help people in their spiritual as well as their mental and physical life. We obviously have a number of different operating rooms, and I have enjoyed operating there, but these days we have a very well qualified African surgeon. He trained under a thing called the Pan-African Academy of Christian Surgeons in Cameroon, And he's doing an excellent, excellent job. I have operated with him several times, and I think he's better trained than ever I was. And it's just a joy to see how the work is carrying on in African hands.
But here we are with a list of all these options in the nursing college or community college, perhaps we would understand more easily. And so we do have 14 options and 1,000 students, but the government says that every option should be led by a PhD. Every option. At the moment, well, 5 years ago we had one PhD, and sad to say, he died of his first heart attack at 56. And then about 2 years ago, we got another PhD who returned from his studies in Switzerland. So he is the general director, and that's all we have, one PhD. But the government would like to see 1 or 2 PhDs for each of these options. It's impossible without a scholarship program. They simply cannot possibly afford to do it themselves. So that is what the Lord has challenged us to do, to see to the educational needs of the staff of the college as well as the senior staff of the hospital so that they get the further training that they need to be well recognized. It's amazing in some ways that here in Canada, for example, one does 4 years of medical school, and then you do about 4 or 5 years of specialty training, say in surgery, and then you are a surgeon. But in Congo, the government says, but now you need a PhD in surgery. So it's really a big challenge to do that. At the moment, we have 8 postgrads who are in further training. The amphitheaters, which give you an idea of how we can accommodate the 1,000 students. And on Fridays at 11:30 in the morning, all of the students are encouraged to come and worship, and the majority of them certainly do. These students are taught pastoral care. Many of them come from church backgrounds, Christian families, and so they are taught pastoral care in first, second, and third year so that they will know how to meet the spiritual needs of their patients when they are qualified in nursing, midwifery, laboratory sciences, pharmacy, anesthesia, whatever. But the opportunity has been given to me to teach gerontology to graduate nurses who've been out working somewhere for a number of years and decide they want to upgrade their level of education. And gerontology is the study of the aging process. And I say, well, this is just delightful because every year I am 1 more year qualified for that. I love it. They are great students and we talk a lot. And just to give you an idea, I mean, gerontology, what are the needs of the elderly? Well, for example, we're living in a city of 1 million people. And it does not have one single stoplight or stop sign. Now, how are the elderly going to slowly cross the road with traffic circulating both ways all the time? That's just one little challenge. Also, there are no park benches in the whole city. So if you walk into town and you're feeling tired, what are you going to do? No park benches, no parks. There's so much that needs to be done. But let's get back to the scholarships. This is Dr. Samuel and Zawadi. Dr. Samuel is already a trained doctor, and he's just finishing his 4-year specialization in surgery. And his wife, Zawadi, also a trained doctor, and now finishing a 4-year specialization in pediatrics. They're studying in Uganda, and they have promised and are keeping in close touch with our sister hospital in Beni, and certainly expect to go back there. Samuel was the director of the hospital before he went for his studies, and he was very much appreciated. One of his best interventions was what to do with the people who can't pay their bill. People come for care, and they say, but I don't have any money. So he decided on a new program. He said, I know what we'll do. If they can't pay their bill, we will give them a Bible. And we will forgive their debt and just say, okay, go home. You have no debt here. You are forgiven. And we want you to share the good news of Jesus Christ from the Bible with all your friends and acquaintances and tell them that you were forgiven for your debt at the hospital. That was his philosophy, and it seemed to work, even if they had as many as 1,000 people a month who could not pay their bill. They kept going. So that's Samuel and Zawadi to finish perhaps in March or April. Another couple, Janine, the mom has already completed her master's in reproductive health. She's a midwife, and now she has a master's in reproductive health in Cameroon. And her husband, Jonathan, is doing a doctorate on water of Bunya. He has sampled 86 samples twice to see what the water quality is and where he can ask perhaps the World Bank for an intervention. A city of 1 million people that does not have clean water is a disaster. So he hopes with his doctorate he can intervene in the city. And Jonathan should be finished by December. Vicky's doing a stage. She should be finished by December. So we expect them back in Bunya at the end of December. And another scholarship candidate is Tim Kay. He has been the administrative dean of the college. He did his master's in Christian leadership locally, and he's now finishing his doctorate in Kisumu, Kenya. And his chosen topic was the home care needs of the elderly in Bunya, because there is nothing. There's no palliative care, there's no home care. There are no nurses who go from place to place. If somebody needs a dressing on a wound, they have to find their way 5 or 10 kilometers back to the hospital to get the dressing done today. So he saw this as being a big challenge, and he hopes to go ahead with setting up a program for the home care of the elderly. But with fellas like this, fellas and Janine, one woman, and there's more coming up, the cost of them getting higher education is costing us about 20,000 Canadian a month. And that's a lot. We pray a lot. We ask the Lord to provide, and he has been providing. I have not yet seen how he is going to provide for the month of September, because the last news I had, we were still 10,000 short. But he does provide, and it's our friends and acquaintances who know the Lord and who know the value of work in the Lord's name, who contribute to Emmaus Canada for this scholarship program. Emmaus is just down the road here in Burlington, or was at Crossroads Center. They had to relocate because of COVID, but that's where all the funding is handled. It's not for us, it's just for the scholarship program. And I would encourage you, if you have any shekels in your pocket that you could possibly spare, that you can do an e-transfer. It's very easy on your computer or by mail, and make a contribution to Emmaus Canada. Now, I think our time is definitely up. Another time, I would tell you about the School for the Deaf that has 429 students, and they too could use 5,000 or 10,000 a month. Okay.
So our testimony, hitherto the Lord has helped us. We plan, Lord willing, to go back to Congo at the end of December this year for 3 months. And in part because Nancy needs to check up on all of these students. This is a project which is approved by Canada Revenue Authority, and we have to make sure that money is spent the way it's supposed to be spent. And Nancy spends a lot of time chasing up receipts at the other end there to give a good accounting to CRA. But thank you very, very much for your attention. Lovely to have been with you.